Man, it is good to be making another video, but it's even better to have college football this weekend. We've had some test runs, not really test runs, I mean they count, they're in the season, but UAB has played, some FCS schools have played, Central Arkansas, Austin Peay, and UAB have all played each other, and some others this past weekend, and the catastrophe has not unfolded yet. There has not been a giant landslide of any sort as of yet. Things are still going and good. Teams are playing. College football can happen. So this video we are talking football. We're talking about predictions for the ACC and the Big 12. So let's get into it. Thank you for clicking on this video. You are a good sport. This is College Football Media. On this channel we talk teams, trends, and traditions all the way to logos, history, and predictions. If that sounds interesting to you, consider subscribing for in-depth college football content. Whew, man, I don't know about you, but I am so excited to finally be having a season to talk about, and hopefully that this college football season can bring more unity than division. That's my hope, and that's why we are talking football. And we're just here to have fun and interact with people that love the sport as much as we do. ACC, Big 12. The Big 12, any teams playing in the Big 12 this week, I believe, are just their non-conference games, so you might have some odd scheduling there. They're not actually playing conference games in the Big 12 as of yet. But I'm still going to go ahead and make the conference predictions for the Big 12, just, I guess, to kind of be on the safe side of the YouTube comment section. Take that how you will. But yeah, the ACC, we're getting conference games this week, and those games obviously matter a huge deal. So before we get into season predictions, I'll touch on some of the big games this week that I want to keep an eye on and want to be able to watch. College game day is at Wake Forest for Clemson at Wake Forest. I expect Clemson should be able to win that game without too many hiccups. Of course, first game of the season and in a post-pandemic world. But for the most part, I think that game should be able to be handled by Clemson. You also have Duke at Notre Dame, because Notre Dame is now a player in the ACC within the conference and able to compete for a championship, so that's going to be a lot of fun. And Georgia Tech at Florida State. This might be one of the biggest games that I want to see, which granted, neither of those teams probably will end up at the table at a conference championship game, but the future of these two programs is huge. Jeff Collins, only in his, second, maybe third year at Georgia Tech, still trying to build that program and change it from what it was in the previous era. And Mike Norvell, now at Florida State. A new era for them as well. Very interesting, still young head coaches going head-to-head, and we'll see what happens. Now, 2020 season predictions. I'm going to kind of do this in two parts. This first video, call it part 1, is ACC and Big 12 predictions. The next video will be the SEC conference predictions, and we'll compile the entire playoff predictions in that video as well. It may not be the next video up on the channel, but it'll be before the SEC kicks off on September the 26th. So let's talk ACC football. I'm going to kind of break them into segments. First, let's just talk about upset teams in the ACC. These are teams that I don't expect to be contenders at the end to make the championship game for the conference, but definitely very good teams and can upset a lot of the main players. These teams could include Louisville, Florida State, Virginia, Virginia Tech, Duke, and Georgia Tech. So these teams could get an upset against, say, a Clemson or Notre Dame and affect the outcomes of who's meeting in the conference championship game. Just don't expect those teams to make it quite yet, but very interesting to watch to see how they do in the future. So contenders. The other contenders that I have in the ACC for this season, you have 2 front runners and 2 wild cards. Clemson, obvious. Notre Dame, also kind of expected. And then the dark horses, North Carolina and Miami. North Carolina, of course, with head coach Mac Brown, and they have quarterback figured out, and that's what matters so much. North Carolina has a solid quarterback on the roster. Flip to Miami. De'Aaron King, the transfer, comes in, and Miami is starting to pick up some momentum in recruiting, which, granted, doesn't necessarily affect on-field results this season, but they have a second-year head coach who also has some experience with Miami prior to becoming the head coach at the U. But they hopefully have quarterback figured out as well with that transfer coming in. Now Notre Dame, probably a lot more expected. Of course, Ian Book, and they made the playoff just a couple of years ago. Clemson, it's a given. Trevor Lawrence, Dabo Swinney, the defense, Brent Venables. I mean, come on, right? Out of those 4 teams, only one of them does not play Clemson. And that is North Carolina. So that gives opportunity if North Carolina can take care of business for the most part in all of their other conference games. They have the best shot to meet Clemson at the end of the season because they are not scheduled in the regular season. However, North Carolina does have to play both Notre Dame and Miami. So North Carolina does not play Clemson, and conversely, Miami does not play Notre Dame. So those are the matchups out of the top 4 teams that don't play each other. So, of course, it's kind of like a web trying to figure out who beats who. I think we can safely put Clemson in the conference championship game, and it's now just figuring out who their opponent is. Miami plays Clemson a lot earlier in the season. Notre Dame plays Clemson later in the season. And historically, under Swinney, Clemson has gotten better as the season has progressed. So perhaps maybe Miami has a better shot of faring out in that game. But of course, if they both lose to Clemson, then it's based on who beats North Carolina and, of course, obviously the rest of their schedule. But I'm going to go with Miami. Notre Dame is probably the popular pick to play Clemson. But I'm going to say, hey, Miami, that they can finish the season number 2 in the conference and meet Clemson in a rematch for the conference championship game. Clemson versus Miami. Of course, I expect it could be a competitive game by the end of the season, but for my prediction, I'm going to go with the safe bet of Clemson that they win the conference. Now, I don't expect Clemson to go undefeated throughout the whole thing. I expect probably at least 1 loss somewhere in there. Of course, 2020 has been crazy so far. Everybody knows that. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But I still think Clemson will be able to make it through this 10-game conference schedule and get pretty much safely out with 1 loss and a conference championship. Now, shift gears to the Big 12. And let me be a little clear that the Big 12, this is forecasting a little bit further ahead because, like I said, the Big 12 is not playing conference games this weekend. That will come later on. I believe the 26th, the same as the SEC, but I could be wrong on that. So I am not married to these predictions at all. And this goes basically for all the conferences. I'm kind of trying to come at it from a different approach than, say, I did last year. These predictions, as soon as games are played, you can scrap them. They're preseason predictions. I'm not going to hold myself really to them or be married to them. Like, I can change my mind once games are played. That's kind of the point of college football, right? We don't need to set our predictions in stone from the preseason and then try to find some confirmation bias to prove it later on. There's no skill in that. So these predictions are just for fun, and take them as that. But so basically, that's a long way of saying I'm not married to these predictions. Like, I'm gonna change my mind, as I expect you should too, once we see players on the field. But with that being said, the Big 12, of course, I might slightly change something by the time that next SEC and playoff video comes out, when that rolls back around. But for the time being, let's just talk Big 12. Contenders, of course, for the most part, any team in the Big 12 could be an upset team, maybe except like Kansas or Kansas State, which granted, they both have some pretty good coaches, but I think you get the idea. So contenders, let's just jump straight into that. The obvious, Oklahoma and Texas, and then you could also include both Iowa State and Oklahoma State. Iowa State has quarterback figured out as well, like some of the teams I talked about in the ACC. So they very well could be one of the top two teams and make it to that championship game. Same with Oklahoma State. If they get some big wins here and there, they could find themselves in the top two as well. But I do expect, at least at this point, for it to end up being Oklahoma and Texas. There is a lot of optimism for Texas, like slight, subtle optimism from, say, some national media types. It's not as much of a hype train as it has been in the past because Texas, is one of those teams that everybody gets high on, super hyped and excited for how they're going to do, and then they just plummet, right? But might be some actual legitimate, tangible growth going on in the program, and maybe more importantly in the trenches and administration and all that kind of stuff. So there might be more tangible on the field results from Texas this year, and not just kind of luckily finding themselves in the place of, say, a Sugar Bowl win against Georgia. That was kind of more happenstance, whereas this year and perhaps in the future, they might be more legitimate than they were back then. So Texas definitely has the potential to perhaps win the conference. I'm not saying they will, but it could be a little bit more legitimate this year. Of course, Tom Herman's been there longer. They've got, I think, good offensive line in the trenches, good team overall, good leadership, solid defense, I would generally expect. And of course, Sam Ehlinger is back. So, remains to be seen, but they could legitimately win the conference this year, and that would be saying something. But, of course, to the north, you still have OU. Lincoln Riley and their new quarterback, Spencer Rattler. He's the first quarterback in a while that Oklahoma's had that they have recruited themselves. And that's a big deal. The past three have all been transfers, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but now you have a young, I believe, redshirt freshman, Spencer Rattler, who is the starter at Oklahoma. And obviously, none of us are concerned about Oklahoma's offense. That's not the problem. They have had a defensive coordinator change here recently, so we'll see how that continues to go for Oklahoma. If their defense continues to get better, like over the course of 2, 3, 4 years, whatever the case may be, they continue to improve. Oklahoma continues to become more legitimate, but that's still the question, is the defense, which, like, granted, their defense has been good enough to win the Big 12. And that's what I expect them to do this year. I predict Oklahoma to win the Big 12 as of now. But it's still kind of a transition year. With the pandemic and everything, like, nobody really knows what's going to happen. And the Big 12 it's up for grabs. You have Iowa State, you have Oklahoma State, you have Texas, all kind of trying to push on Oklahoma, that something that they haven't given up or let anybody really in or get close to within the past 3-4 years. I predict Oklahoma will be good enough to win the conference yet again this year. How far will their defense be? Will they emerge and bust out of the scene this year and be good enough to win a national championship? Again, I don't know. Remains to be seen. That's the fun of playing on the field. So Oklahoma winning the Big 12, Clemson winning the ACC. Those picks sound kind of bland, but hey, what can I say? Their predictions, again, I'll change my opinion probably more frequently this season, week after week after week, based on how these teams are playing. Of course, it'll be fun to see the conference schedules the way that they are constructed for this year. It's unique. We've never seen anything quite this intense before when it comes to conference schedules. Very, very exciting. I'm so looking forward to football being played on Saturdays yet again. Let me know how terrible my predictions were in the comment section down below, but be nice. I look forward to reading what you have to say. It's good to be making a video again, and like I said, even better to have football literally right around the corner. It is being played. We made it. We are here. So thank you so much for watching this video. Leave your predictions for this season in the comment section down below, and subscribe and perhaps hit the notification bell so you don't miss that video in just a couple weeks, giving the SEC predictions and the complete playoff predictions as well. I look forward to that. Look forward to making videos all throughout this season and for you to be along the ride with me. Thank you so much for watching this video. Until next time, be goody now.